Welcome to the Sleep Dives channel. All right, today we're jumping into pages 281 to 315, and we're going to explore some really powerful tools for, well, untangling our communication. We'll be looking at the mental shortcuts we all take that so often lead to conflict, and we'll unpack the skills we need to build some genuine, real understanding. So let's kick things off with a question that I think a lot of us have asked. Why is it that you can get a team of really smart, really capable people together in a room and somehow the results are just lackluster? The answer, it turns out, isn't about their intelligence. It's about the invisible, lightning-fast mental processes that are running the show behind the scenes. Okay, here's our game plan. First, we're going to climb something called the invisible ladder to see how we leap to conclusions. Then, we'll get personal with your left-hand column to drag our hidden thoughts into the light. After that, we'll get into the fine art of balancing advocacy and inquiry, look at some super practical tools, and finally, figure out how to turn all this into a skill that actually sticks. Right. Our first tool is a metaphor, and honestly, it's a brilliant one. It's called the ladder of inference, and it perfectly describes a mental journey that you and I take probably dozens of times a day, almost always without even realizing it. Now, the really wild thing about this is the speed. I mean, this isn't some slow, deliberate, logical process. It's a snap judgment. We grab one little piece of raw data from the world, and in a blink, we scramble up a series of mental rungs to land on a belief or an action. It's so automatic that it feels like we're just seeing reality, when actually we're building our own version of it.
Let's make this real with the example here. So the bottom rung, the foundation, is pure observable data. The meeting was set for 9 a.m. and John walked in at 9:30. He didn't say why. Okay, that's a fact. But just watch how fast we climb. Next rung up, we start adding our own meaning. He knew when the meeting started. He chose to come in late. From there, we make a huge leap to a generalization. John is always late. And that's how we get to the very top, a solid, concrete belief. We can't count on John. He's just unreliable. See that? We went from one timestamp to a complete character assassination in just a few seconds.
And here is the absolute kicker. Once we've formed that belief at the top of our ladder, it doesn't just hang out up there. Oh no, it becomes a filter for reality. The very next time we deal with John, we're now unconsciously scanning for evidence that proves he's unreliable. This is the reflexive loop. Our beliefs literally change what data we even notice, which then, of course, reinforces our beliefs. It's a cycle that can be incredibly difficult to escape. So if this ladder of inference is all happening inside our own heads, how in the world do we become aware of it? Well, that brings us to our next tool. It's a really powerful diagnostic exercise called the left-hand column, and it is designed to expose that massive gap between what we're thinking and what we're actually saying. Just take a look at this conversation between Jim and his supervisor, Todd. On the right, you've got the actual dialogue. It's polite, it's professional. Jim is saying things like, "I'm happy to talk through any changes." But look over on the left, in his hidden thoughts. It is a completely different universe. He's thinking his constant changes are the real reason we're behind schedule, and it's such a shame I can't just tell him he's the problem. This disconnect right here is the breeding ground for misunderstanding and dysfunction. Now, the real power of this exercise isn't just writing it down. It's what you do with it afterwards. By looking at your own left-hand column, you can start to ask some really profound questions. Why didn't you say what you were really thinking? What were you assuming would happen if you did? What was the cost of playing it safe? And what was the payoff? Answering these honestly is the first real step to breaking out of those old, unhelpful patterns. Okay, so we've done some internal reflection. We've seen our hidden thoughts. How do we actually use that to have better conversations? Well, the next step is to learn how to test our assumptions out in the open, not just reinforce them in our heads. And that requires a really delicate balance. I absolutely love this visual of the palette of conversation. Think of advocacy, that's stating your view, and inquiry, that's asking about their view, as two primary colors. Now, most of us are pretty good advocates. We know how to make our point. But the real magic, the kind of discussion that creates breakthroughs, happens when you start mixing the colors. When you blend your strong advocacy with genuine, curious inquiry. If you don't, you get stuck in the corners. All advocacy becomes dictating, and all inquiry becomes a pointless interrogation. This phrase right here, this is basically the golden recipe for a balanced conversation. It does two things so perfectly. First, it advocates with transparency. Here is my view, and here is how I have arrived at it. You're literally walking them up your ladder of inference. But then it immediately pivots to inquiry. How does it sound to you? You're not just asking for agreement, you're genuinely asking them to stress test your thinking, to find the holes, to help you build a stronger idea together. The theory is great, right? But what do you actually say when you're in the middle of a tough conversation? Well, the great news is the source gives us some wonderfully practical protocols. Think of them as recipes that we can start using right away. So, when you're advocating for your position, the name of the game is transparency. Don't just drop your conclusion on the table. Show your work, explain the data and the assumptions behind it. And here's a real power move. Reveal where you feel your own thinking is weakest. Saying something like, here's one part of this you might help me think through, isn't a weakness. It's an invitation to collaborate, and it makes people trust you more, not less. And when it's time to inquire about their view, the goal is genuine understanding, not a cross-examination. So instead of a confrontational, well, where's your proof for that? You could try a much softer, more curious phrase like, can you help me understand your thinking here? You're not trying to win a fight, you're trying to see their ladder of inference, to see the world through their eyes for a moment. Now, it's really tempting to look at all these phrases and think of them as just conversational tricks or clever lines to memorize. But the real goal here isn't to just learn a script. It's to bootstrap ourselves into a completely new way of interacting, a new way of learning with other people. Look, becoming truly skillful at this takes practice and it takes reflection. The source suggests a really clear path. You start by using the recipes. Then, after a tough conversation, you go back and examine it. What worked? Where did you get stuck? As you do this over and over, you'll start to develop your own general strategies. You'll get better and better at genuinely seeing things from their point of view. And eventually, you'll feel comfortable enough to ask for feedback directly, turning every single conversation into an opportunity to learn. So let's wrap this up with the big takeaways. First, start noticing your own automatic leaps up the ladder of inference. Second, use that left-hand column tool like a mirror to see the assumptions you're hiding, even from yourself. Third, in every important conversation, consciously practice balancing your advocacy with genuine inquiry. And finally, don't be afraid to start simple. Using those conversational recipes is the best on-ramp to building this as a real, lasting skill. And that leaves us with one final thought. I want you to think about the single most challenging, frustrating, or stuck conversation in your life right now. You know the one. What do you think would happen if, the next time you had it, you decided to simply make your reasoning visible and then you genuinely invited the other person to explore it with you? Just think, how might that one small shift change everything?